Well, hi folks. Welcome to our webinar. Of course, in true Friday afternoon fashion, we have had some technical computer issues, but it seems like we're gonna be able to make this run. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So this is Montana Wilderness Association's webinar on bear management in Northwest Montana. And we'll make this a good way to start your weekend. My name is Allie Maloney. I'm the Northwest Montana Field Director, coming to you from the Whitefish office. And with me today is Amy Pearson, who is our Flathead-Kootenai Chapter Board President, and Tim Manley, who is a wildlife management specialist and bear expert for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and a special appearance from Dylan Tabish. And I don't know your official title, Dylan, but you do all sorts of different PR stuff for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I do know that. So before we launch into full introductions for Tim, just a couple reminders on protocols. I did say this a couple of minutes ago, but more people have joined us. So on the bottom of your screen, you should have a chat button and a Q&A button. Let's keep chat just to chat and thank yous and interesting comments, but kind comments, and Q&A for questions for Tim. Amy and I will be the voice of the question, so we'll be monitoring the question box and we'll be asking Tim questions along the way and at the end of this webinar. So this webinar is a service brought to you by the Flathead-Kootenai chapter, and if you're not already a Montana Wilderness Association member, we hope you'll be inspired at the end of this webinar to join us as a member. And if you're interested in volunteering, even during this time of social distancing, we still have ways you can participate and volunteer and become more connected to wild lands. We have a poll going, and we're going to leave it open for one more minute, and then I'll end the poll, and Tim will be able to look at that poll, and it'll help allocate his time during our webinar. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amy.
Thank you, Allie. Like Allie said, I'm Amy Pearson. I'm the local board chapter president. It's a great honor today to be here at this webinar with one of my favorite people and an expert grizzly bear manager, Tim Manley. I'm sure a lot of you already know Tim and are familiar with him. I've known him for about probably a decade now. I met him in the park when he was doing some work there, and he's since become a dear friend, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say today. So a little bit more about Tim. He's the wildlife management specialist here in Region 1. He is from Great Falls originally, so kind of out near my country, my family's country. He went to Colorado State where he got a degree in wildlife biology. And his favorite area in this country is the Whitefish Range, which I think is fantastic. Tim has been in his job since 1993 as the grizzly bear specialist expert. So with that, I also want to thank Tim again for graciously being here with us today on this webinar, and everybody for being part of this kind of unique time in our society, but we're still making things happen. So thank you so much for being here. And like Ali said, I hope that all of you will consider being a member of MWA. It's an awesome, awesome organization. And so with that, Tim, how are we doing? Do you think you're gonna be ready to go?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go.
Awesome.
Okay.
Tim, can you see the poll results?
Yes, I saw the poll results. Yep. So I'll go ahead and address those as we go through it.
Sounds great. I'm gonna stop sharing the poll results and you can
share the screen.
Let's make sure. Okay, there you go.
How's that look?
That looks okay, but we're seeing presenter view.
Oh yeah, we need to change.
Okay.
So we need to swap shared screens here.
I'm glad I have Dylan here. He's our tech guy.
No, I'm
so
probably
grateful.
complicating it. I'm gonna try this again. Let's see here. Gonna go
You
here.
wanted the-
Yeah, we want to talk about presenter mode. There we go. Okay, how's that look?
How's that look?
Looks very good.
Okay.
Okay, now you
good.
don't have to go into presenter mode. You can just scroll down.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming and bearing with us as we go through the technical difficulties. My laptop wanted to do an update in the middle of everything, and so I'm actually working on Dylan's computer now, and we had to load my presentation onto his computer and get everything to work. So I'm glad everybody hung with us for a few minutes. So what I wanted to do today was talk about grizzly bear management in Northwest Montana. And as Amy said, I've worked on grizzly bears in this position since 1993. And basically my job is try to reduce conflicts between humans and grizzly bears. And with that, I'm just going to give an overview of the type of work that we do and be happy to answer any questions after we get through it. So to advance this, I can just click.
So I would do it off the left screen. So I would
Over
just
here?
click on the next one. Yep.
Okay,
That work?
that'll work. So grizzly bear management.
Oh, actually,
Not
it's not
playing
going
video.
for some reason. There you go.
There we go.
So you want to click on the bottom right.
Okay, he's got multiple screens here. I'm just learning this. All right. So grizzly bear management in Northwest Montana. The area I cover is basically the Continental Divide over to Lake Kootenai, and from the Sealy Swan Divide up to the Canadian border. I actually now don't work in Lincoln County unless they need some help up there. Kim Anasata-Libby covers that area. And in the picture, you can see my technician, Justine, that works with me. This will be her third year. And she's holding up a grizzly bear cub that we actually caught in the fall up out of Fort Tyne. One thing people probably don't know is that the grizzly bears are actually Montana's state animal. And in 1983, students from Montana schools voted on what they wanted as the state animal. And you can see that the total votes was over 34,000 of the students voted for the grizzly bear, and the elk came in second. So there's a lot of interest in grizzly bears and a lot of support for grizzly bears in the state of Montana. This is the area basically in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, and you can see at the top, it goes from Canadian border down to essentially Highway 200, and from Highway 93 over to the Rocky Mountain front. And of this area, this is how much of it I cover. And so I have the North Fork, South Fork, Middle Fork of the Flathead Valley, the rivers, the Swan River area. I have most of the Bob Marshall Wilderness, the Great Bear Wilderness, and parts of the Mission Mountain Wilderness, and all of the Whitefish Range. So a lot of country, and I feel very lucky to have some of the best country, I think, in Northwest Montana for managing grizzly bears. What we're going to talk today about is just a little bit about grizzly bear identification. Are they black bears? Are they grizzly bears that people are looking at? A little bit on grizzly bear habitat, where are bears at certain times of the year, and then concentrate a lot on prevention, the type of conflicts that we deal with, and how to reduce mortalities on grizzly bears. So to bring everybody up to speed, grizzly bears are currently listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. In 2004, Kate Kendall with the USGS survey, they did a population estimate using DNA and rubbed and came up with an estimate of 765 grizzly bears in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. And since then, Rick Mace started a population trend monitoring program in 2004, and Cecily Costello continues to head that program up. And basically, they're looking at the population trend over time, and it's about 2.3% a year. So right now, we're up around 1,000 grizzly bears in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. So grizzly bear or black bear? And you would be surprised at how many calls we get from people wondering whether or not the bear in their backyard is a grizzly bear or whether it's a black bear. And just very quickly to show you some of the differences, The bear on the left is a grizzly bear. You can see the long claws. They're basically as long as your fingers. They have the light tipped guard hairs, which are usually pretty prominent. And that's usually the last quarter to half inch of the guard hairs, light in color. And they have more rounded ears than the black bear. They have more of a dished in shape profile. They have a hump over their shoulder, which a lot of people think that's actually a muscle mass, but really it's actually mostly hair. And I think bears will kind of raise that as a hackle and make them look a little bit bigger, kind of like dogs do. And the other characteristic I tell people to look for on grizzly bears is they a lot of times have a light colored saddle stripe right behind the front shoulder. And you don't typically see anything like that on black bears. And so rather than just looking for one characteristic, does it have a hump or not have a hump, I tell people to look at a variety of characteristics. Try to see if you can see the claws, whether you can see the grizzled hair on the bear, big round broad heads, rounded ears, and a shoulder hump plus also the stripe behind the front shoulder. Here's a close-up picture of grizzly bear claws. They can be light in color or darker in color. Younger bears tend to have darker colored claws, but again, they're about as long as your fingers, especially in the spring when they haven't been doing a lot of digging. And of course, those claw marks show up in front of the toe pads on a grizzly bear's front foot. And usually their claw marks about an inch and a half to 2 inches out in front of the toe pads. The hind foot of the grizzly bear is a little bit different shape than the hind foot of a black bear. They're triangular. The rear foot pad is triangular in shape and doesn't tend to have that hair on the instep like you can see on the black bear picture on the right. And so the claw marks are the same size on black bear and grizzly bears on the rear foot, but you definitely can see the difference with the indentation on the hind pad. I like to show this picture because it demonstrates how differently a bear can look during certain times of the year. So on the left, that picture is taken June 1st, and on the right, October 4th. And this is the same grizzly bear. It's a 4-year-old female. She weighed 200 pounds in June and she weighed 300 pounds in October. And you can see how much different the bear looks during the course of the year. It basically shed out the previous coat and has a good fall winter coat on the right-hand side. So why is it important to be able to identify bears? Well, for one thing, we want to know, what kind of bear might be causing the conflict, what kind of bear people are seeing, and also to try to reduce mistaken identity kills. And so this is an adult male grizzly bear that was shot and killed in the Swan Valley by a black bear hunter from out of state. Thought it was a black bear, and obviously after he shot the bear, he went up and saw that it was a grizzly bear. And so, that's why it's important, especially for hunters, to try to understand the difference between black bears and grizzly bears. So grizzly bear habitat, the ecosystems up here in Northwest Montana have evolved with wildfire, and a lot of grizzly bear habitat depends on wildfire. A lot of huckleberry shrub fields are created and maintained through fire. And this is up in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. This is one of the burns from about 4 years ago. Wildfire that had started up there in the Strawberry Creek area, Sabato, and again, creates good grizzly bear habitat. So what we're going to do is basically, I'm just going to take you through the seasons and when bears den, when they come out of their dens, just to give people an understanding where bears are at certain times of the year. So this is a classic grizzly bear den. In our area, grizzlies tend to den above 6,000 feet in elevation. They tend to go into the den as early as late October, but most of the bears den during the month of November. And most of our grizzly bears dig their dens and excavate them. We've had a couple of natural dens in natural rock caves, but for the most part, they dig their dens and they'll dig a new den every year. So in the springtime, when bears are coming out of their dens, we'll get in the helicopter and we'll radio track and try to locate the dens, and also try to get visuals on the females that have cubs or may have cubs to try to see how many cubs they have. And in this case, this is in the Mission Mountain Wilderness area, and it's a female grizzly bear, and she has 3 new cubs of the year. And so by documenting how many cubs are coming out of the den with her early in the year, we can follow them throughout the course of the year to see what the cub survival rates are and also what the litter sizes are. Here's another video. This is a female grizzly with 2 cubs of the year. And this is up on the north end of the Great Bear Wilderness area. And she had just come out of the den. She has her 2 cubs. And again, we follow them throughout the course of the year, as long as she's wearing a radio collar, to see what the survival rates of those cubs are. And you can tell they're still up in a lot of snow. A lot of times when bears come out of their dens, they'll stay around the den for a week or 2, especially if they have cubs, before they start moving around. In this case, this female grizzly bear, she has 1 cub of the year, and she decided to carry the cub rather than having him follow her. And that's up in the Jewel Basin hiking area. And some of the video footage that you're going to see and that you just saw is from Two Bear Air Rescue. They're a local nonprofit that does a lot of search and rescue, and they're training their helicopter camera operators to locate objects with their infrared cameras and to be able to zoom in. And so we do some training with them by radio tracking the grizzly bears. They're able to train their camera operators, but it also gives us an opportunity to get very good visuals on these family groups. So how does that work? Well, this is the infrared from the Two Bear Air helicopter, and you can see the infrared signature of these grizzly bears, and you can actually see their tracks due to the heat signature. And if you switch from infrared to daylight, you'll be able to see the difference right there. And so you can see the advantage of having the infrared camera to be able to spot the bears in the tree canopy or in the shrubs. Another neat thing with the infrared camera, this is a grizzly bear den up in the Whitefish Range, and you can actually zoom in from a long distance away. We're about half a mile away. And what I'm going to do now is show you what it looks like in daylight. And so daylight on the left, and on the right hand side is the infrared, and you can actually see inside the den, and you actually see the female grizzly bear, and you can see that she still has at least 1 cub with her. And if we zoom in even closer, you get a little bit better picture of that. You can actually see her female in the front, the bigger bear, and in the back you can see 1 of her cubs. Just some kind of unique technology, and this is all, like I said, at least half a mile away. We're not right on top of the den. It just looks like we are. So what do grizzly bear dens look like? Well, on the left, that's the outside of a typical grizzly bear den. We call that excavated part the porch. And if you climbed into the den and turned around and looked outside, this is about what it would look like. This is a grizzly bear den up on the garden wall in Glacier Park, looking over towards Oberlin Bend. And they sometimes will line the den with bear grass and tree boughs, and it doesn't smell in there. They don't urinate or defecate, and they give birth to their cubs in the dens, usually the end of January, first part of February. And this is Mark Ruby, who works for the Swan Ranger District as a wildlife biologist, and Eric Peterson, and they picked up a radio collar. It was in a den down in the Swan Range that had dropped off a male grizzly bear for me. So as we get into springtime, we're in spring right now, basically from May till mid-July, and bears do a lot of eating of vegetation. In our area, about 80% of their diet is vegetation in the spring. And on the right-hand side, a preferred natural forb is cow parsnip. So if you see something like that that's bitten down to the ground, and you can see that big pathway through the cow parsnip, it's probably a bear that's been feeding on it. Both black bears and grizzly bears eat cow parsnip. This is also the time that we get bears that are in the valley that may come into people's backyards because of the green grass. And we've gotten a lot of calls this year on grizzly bears coming into backyards and getting feeding on the green grass. It's watered, it's fertilized, and it's one of the first things to green up. Bears also spend a lot of time in the avalanche chutes in the springtime. They're snow-free, and they feed on glacier lily bulbs, cow parsnip, spring beauty, and the avalanche chutes. It's also breeding season, May to July. We're in the peak of breeding season right now. And this is a big adult male on the east side of the Flathead Valley following a female that's in estrus. Spring's also the time that bears will hunt elk calves and deer fawns. And there's about a 1 to 2 week time period where they're actually able to catch the deer and the elk fawns. And as we get into summer, that's mid-July to mid-September, and that's essentially the huckleberry season or the buffalo berry season. And bears in our area spend a lot of time feeding on huckleberries. It's one of their main diets in the summer months, and that's, you know, so they can put on enough fat to be able to survive through the winter. We've also have some bears that use Army cutworm moth sites. This is up on Sayee in Glacier National Park. Eric Peterson actually is doing his master's project, looking at moth feeding sites within Glacier National Park, trying to identify where those sites are. And it's an important food source. He calls those moths little packets of fat, basically. A lot of calories in them, and the bears have learned to roll over the rocks and lick the moths off. And then as we get into the fall months, mid-September, after the huckleberries drop off until the bear's den, they have a wide variety. Their diet is very wide. They'll feed on persistent berries like mountain ash on the right-hand side. They also feed on the gut piles from hunter-killed animals. And this female grizzly and her 2 cub are actually at a site where a carcass is buried. So they'll dig glacier lily bulbs and spring beauty, biscuit root, wide-ranging diet during the fall months. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth on grizzly bear management. This is my primary job and what I typically deal with. On the left-hand side is a grizzly bear at Echo Lake last year, just before Memorial Day weekend, feeding on fish that somebody had thrown on the shore. In this case, we didn't go in and trap for that bear. It really wasn't causing any conflicts. But the photo on the right is the type of thing that we do get concerned about, and that's a grizzly bear that broke into a camp trailer to get bread and cat food that people were storing in there. And so when we get into these types of situations, that's where most of our effort is put. So when people are living in bear country, you know, I think it's their responsibility to try to secure attractants, make sure they aren't leaving stuff out the bears are going to get into. A lot of times we have seasonal residents up here that aren't, you know, they're snowbirds, they're gone for the winter, they come back in the spring. The bears have been in their yard eating dandelions or grass, and they show up and you see bears coming into their yards, and they call us and ask us to come do something about it. And so, you know, a lot of times we just say, well, yell at the bears, honk your horn, make them leave, let them know you're back home, and make sure you don't have any garbage or attractants out for them, and they usually move on. A lot of residents have, you know, in the North Fork of the Flathead, have grizzly bears on their property. In this case, this is a rub tree up on private land, female grizzly with a couple of yearlings. She come and they put up remote cameras to get pictures, and we've asked them this year to collect hair for DNA when bears come and rub on their rub trees, so we can get more information on which bears are at their property. This is what we don't like to see. This is grizzly bears trying to get a hummingbird feeder. And in those cases, all you people are doing is teaching bears to come to their houses to eat. And in those cases, if we can't resolve the conflict by securing the attractant, sometimes we end up having to trap the bears, relocate them, release them on site, or remove them from the population. That's the last thing that we want to have to do. So basically, our goal is to minimize conflicts between people and grizzly bears. And you can see what this bear was probably doing was basically getting a hummingbird feeder off a front porch. So we're trying to keep people safe. We want to minimize, you know, property damage, livestock damage, and also keep bears alive and in the wild. Some of the objectives that we have are to minimize the grizzly bear conflicts by working with landowners to, you know, identify and secure the attractants. And these are just the example of some of the attractants that we deal with: garbage, fruit trees, chickens are some of the main issues in the valley. And bears like chickens. Here's a grizzly bear down in the Ferndale area that tipped over a chicken coop. and they're very good at getting chickens, as you can see. And we basically went in and put up electric fence around the chickens and the pigs that they also had and stopped the conflicts from occurring. Electric fencing works quite well in doing that. You can get temporary electric fencing down at the local feed stores, or you can order it online. In this case, we put this fence around this chicken coop up near Fort Tyne in a very short period of time and hooked an energizer to it, electric fence energizer. And a lot of times people ask as well, is electric fencing, very effective? And in this case, this is a chicken coop at Ferndale bears have been getting into. The feed is on the left-hand side. You can see the bear knows exactly where the feed is stored, and it knows where the door is. So what I did is I just took some field fence, stapled it to the door, hooked an energizer to it, and when the bear touches it with its nose, it gets shocked and took off. And the bear never went back to the spot. So it's not that hard to do. It's just a matter of kind of sometimes being inventive and trying to come up with solutions that work for the landowner, but are also effective in keeping bears from getting stuff. This is down the Swan Valley. We had a grizzly bear that got into a chicken coop here. We electrified, put electric fence around it, put up a remote camera, and you can see it's just not grizzly bears that like to come in on looking for chickens. In this case, we had black bears, fox, skunks, and a raccoon. They were coming in trying to get to the chickens, and the electric fence kept all of them out. Well, sometimes we've had people put up electric fence like this and watch the bear go right through it. And when they call us and say, well, we put up, the electric fence is up and the bear went right through it. Well, on the far right-hand side on one of the sheds back there is our electric fence energizer. And we noticed when we looked at the video, trying to figure out why the bear got through the fence, was that the landowner hadn't turned it on. And so the bear basically had an electric fence that wasn't turned on, went right through it, and ended up with chicken dinner. Unfortunately, we ended up capturing this bear and we ended up removing it from the population because of all of the chicken coop damage it had done and repeatedly visited chickens. So again, prevention is the main thing that we're trying to promote. On the left-hand side, you can see a well-constructed chicken coop up in the Glen Lake area up south of Eureka. They put up an interior chicken wire and they put electric all the way around it. On the right-hand side, I kind of call this the redneck way of doing it. In fact, that's what the landowner told me. And this was a chicken coop a grizzly bear had gotten into near the Olney area on Highway 93. And so these people put up some roofing material and some metal bars. They put up a pitchfork with a bell on it, and they hung a rake with a bucket full of rocks. And theoretically, when the bear would come to try to get back into this chicken coop, all of this would fall on it and the bear would leave. Well, unfortunately it didn't work well. The bear came back, got into the chicken coop and killed more chickens. So we're tried to work with them on getting the electric fencing up rather than something that they had cobbled together. So here's another example of it working. Grizzly bear had gotten into that chicken coop the night before. We stapled electric screen over the window, hooked up an energizer to it, electrified it, and you saw the bear's reaction. Here's another situation where this grizzly with 2 yearlings up in the Star Meadows area had pushed over in this man door to get horse grain and cat food. So we electrified the whole door. She touched it with her nose. You can see the yearlings in the background. They all took off and haven't been back to that site. So again, being inventive, there's different ways that you can do it to deter bears from getting into stuff. And here's a freezer and a carport. And we put down a rubber mat, put a cattle panel on it, hooked the electric to the cattle panel, the energizer, and when she steps on it, she's going to get shocked. And you can see the cub reacts by following her. Another thing that we tend to deal with is people illegally feeding wildlife, and this is a big issue. A lot of the feed stores carry the food blocks and grain and bird seed and they encourage people to feed wildlife. Well, in the state of Montana, it's actually illegal to feed wildlife, knowingly feed wildlife, and that includes black bears, grizzly bears, mountain lion, deer, elk, and moose. And so we're working with the feed stores to basically take these items off the shelves because technically it's not illegal for you to go in and buy them, but it is illegal for you to put them out unless you have livestock. So again, another big issue that we deal with, including bird feeders. We do a lot of presentations, bear fairs, started down in the Condon area with the Swan Valley Bear Resources, doing bear fairs there. We've also do them up in the Essex area and Polebridge, and we hope to do Eureka and whitefish in the near future. And these are just some of the prevention efforts we did last year. We do temporary electric fencing. We loan out fence energizers, electric fence energizers, critter getters, bear resistant garbage containers. This is a critter getter going off. You can't actually hear it, unfortunately, because it's a little far from the camera. But this is a female grizzly with 3 2-year-olds that set it off, made the noise. They were in a backyard eating grass in Ferndale, and you could see their reaction. These are the Grizzly Kodiak cans. They're bear resistant garbage containers, and they're tested at the Grizzly Wolf Discovery Center down in West Yellowstone. And you can see this is a wild grizzly, testing it over on the east side of the Flathead Valley. I just put the leg of a roadkill deer inside of it. So in case it did get into it, it wasn't going to get any garbage food reward. But you can see it checked it out, rolls it around, rolled it off into the woods, but it wasn't successful in getting access to it. So we're recommending that the garbage hauling companies provide these to landowners. If you live in an area in Northwest Montana where Republic Services is your garbage hauler and you have issues with bears or live in bear country, you can contact them and request a bear resistant Kodiak can. We're trying to get the entire city of Whitefish to have these by the end of 2021 so that the entire city of Whitefish has bear resistant garbage cans for residents and businesses. Other objectives is to work with the agencies to promote the food storage order. On national forest lands, you have to store your food and attractants in a bear resistant manner when you're not present. And you can see electric fence around an outfitter's cook tent down there. You can see the bear resistant food boxes that the Forest Service has installed in some of their campgrounds. And this is video footage from Spotted Bear Barn down at the ranger station, and some grain had been left out from the previous winter, and this bear had learned what that was. They got it locked back up, and you can see this bear was very interested in ripping the boards off the barn to try to get back into the barn to get the grain. So you basically have to be, vigilant all the time because, bears are very good at finding food rewards, and they have a lot of power, and they have the ability to break into some of these structures quite easily. We also worked with the city, county, state, and federal governments to prevent conflicts, and an example of that is the green box sites or the bear garbage transfer stations. And Flathead County basically took the lead in bear proofing all of their, most all of their transfer stations, green box sites. They basically put up a chain link fence with barbed wire across the top and then electric fence on the outside. And Lincoln County is basically doing the same thing. Lake County we're working with in terms of they have automated lids on some of their dumpsters. And Missoula County, down out of the Swan, the county doesn't have dumpsters or green box sites down there, but they're working with Swan Valley Bear Resources and Swan Valley Connections to get bear resistant containers into place. And then like even at our state parks, this is Wayfarers outside of Big Fork. They were having bear issues there and they had chain link fence and the bears were climbing over the top, and it was very simple, just put a hot wire around the top, and that basically has stopped any bears getting into their garbage. And also another objective is to provide information to the media on how people can coexist with bears. As you can tell, there's a lot of interest in grizzly bears. And we've done TV shows with Jack Hanna. Actually had Daryl Hannah come out and do a TBS special with us back in 1998. And I had to include a picture of her sitting in my truck for those of you who know who Daryl Hannah is. But it's important to try to get, the important information out, correct information out to the media when we do our press releases on how to reduce conflicts in bear country. And then, you know, one of the most important is to respond to grizzly bear conflicts on private and public land, so that when people do have issues with bears getting into some kind of attractants, they know that we'll respond. And, you know, our goal again is to try to minimize the conflicts, and we want to keep bears alive in the wild. We don't want to have to remove the bears from the population. And that's why we spend so much time working with landowners to try to prevent problems. These are just an example of some of the issues we dealt with last year. Some of these are in the North Fork of the Flathead. Others are in, you know, different areas. And these are grizzly bears that have gotten into food rewards, whether it be garbage, whether it be chicken feed, whether it be, you know, getting into structures to get food, and checking out cars. We've had actually bears break into cars to get food in some cases. Not as bad as Yosemite, but it does happen. And we do occasionally get livestock depredations, like the sheep in the upper right-hand corner. Most of ours seem to be chickens, bears coming in, getting into killing chickens or pushing indoors to get feed. And, you know, talking to the Montana Wilderness Association, a lot of people think bears just live in the wilderness or in remote areas. You know, we get bears that den in Glacier National Park in the middle of nowhere, and they come out of the park and they get into conflict with people because a lot of stuff is left out and available for them. And the same thing with the Bob Marshall. We've moved bears up Spotted Bear River, and, you know, they don't get anything back there, but they work their way back and they end up showing up on the Flathead Valley and get into conflict with people because there's a lot of food available. So again, that's why we, you know, talk about prevention and trying to prevent problems from occurring in the first place. Fruit trees, big issue in the valley. You know, in the fall, we've got a lot of fruit trees, cherry trees, plum trees, apple trees, pear trees. Bears like fruit. And so in order to try to address that, my wildlife bear technician, Justine, created a Flathead fruit gleaning Facebook page last fall. And it's trying to connect people that have fruit trees with people that want to pick fruit and use it for some reason. And the food banks will also take fruit. So, you know, we're just trying to get more of that fruit picked and up off the ground so bears don't come into conflict and hang out in people's yards eating fruit. So if you're interested, have fruit trees or want to pick, go to the Facebook page, Flathead Fruit Gleaning, and you can connect with other people in the fall to either have your fruit picked or pick it for somebody. So to give you an idea of, you know, how many bears I've dealt with since '93, I've had, you know, over 450 captures of over 270 individual grizzly bears. This actually needs to be updated because just the other day we caught another grizzly bear in Ferndale, and we just released her yesterday down the Flathead along Hunger Horse Reservoir on the east side. So this is actually an old chart. I built it the other day and updated it, and now I got to do it again. So anyway, we're up to 8 captures in 2020 on grizzly bears to date for management. So with that, I get a lot of people that help me out. When you get bears that weigh 600 plus pounds, you need people to get them, help you get them back into the trap. So I do have volunteers and wardens and people that help. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end. And if anybody has any questions, be more than happy to answer them. Okay, do I need to push a button to get rid of something here?
No, I did it for you.
Thank you.
We don't have any open questions, Tim, but can you, oh, maybe we have one. Okay, here we go.
Sure.
You want to read it?
He's got a double screen here, so I'm trying to look at the camera and I'm trying to look at the screen, but that's not working.
You just look at the camera.
How do you decide what to do with grizzly bears that you capture, euthanize versus relocate? That's a very good question. We have what are called the Grizzly Bear Nuisance Guidelines. And basically, they were set forth by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And essentially, it's guidelines. So, you know, it looks at what the conflict was and whether or not the bear is an adult bear, subadult, male or female. And we basically then review it with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, review what the bear's been doing, and make a decision whether it's a bear that we want to relocate or whether we want to give it another chance, you know, give it another chance, relocate it, or whether it's going to be euthanized or removed from the population. And, you know, I have a really hard time killing a bear because it's getting into bird feeders. You know, But a bear that, and so those bears are usually given more chances, that we usually relocate them, or even we'll release them on site with landowner permission if it's a good place. If a bear is breaking into a cabin and causing a lot of property damage, and it's an adult male or even an adult female, we evaluate that and say, if we release this bear again and it continues doing that behavior, what's our liability? We don't want to have property damage. We don't want to have people, put into danger. And so a bear that's breaking into structures like that, we're not going to release again. We're not going to give it another chance. And those bears are removed from the population. So it's a case-by-case basis. All bears are individuals. We try to make the best decision that we can, that we think can give the bear the best chance of survival into the future. But at the same time, we have to take human safety into account also. So that's kind of the process we go through. And, it's all discussed, and the ultimate decision is made by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Hillary Cooley out of Missoula is the grizzly bear recovery coordinator, and she's the one that makes the final decision with our input.
We've got some questions rolling in.
Okay. Where are bears least likely to be in regards to hiking opportunities? Well, I would tell people that anywhere in Northwest or Western Montana, you have the chance of running into grizzly bears, both black bears and grizzly bears. Most of the grizzly bears are in our area, in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, are in Glacier National Park. In comparison, in terms of density, most of the highest density of bears are in the park. The least dense populations for grizzly bears are going to be in the Salish Range, which is west of Highway 93, and then also in the Cabinet Yaak ecosystem. Population in Cabinet Yaak is probably about 50 grizzlies. Population in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem is, like I said, around 1,000. So, but we recommend people carry bear spray, look for bear sign, and just be aware that anywhere you're at in Western Montana, you can run into both black or grizzly bears. Where do you dispose of expired bear spray? What we recommend and what the manufacturers recommend is to discharge the can of expired bear spray. Take it out where where you're not going to spray yourself or other people. Put the wind at your back. Just spray the can till it's empty. And once it's empty, you can just dispose of it in the garbage. That works fine. They allow you to do that. I've heard to play dead if a grizzly bear attacks. What about when she's with her cubs? Is she more apt to go for a kill? Well, like I said, all bears are individuals. And what I would recommend, I wouldn't play dead unless the bear physically is going to touch you. Okay, if the bear's 100 yards away, you don't want to lay on the ground and play dead. Basically, the bear may not even know you're a person at that point. So what we tell people is, you're going down the trail, you see a bear ahead of you, just stop. Does the bear know you're there or not? If it's walking away from you, just turn around and go the other way. If it knows, if it's approaching you, coming towards you, start talking. Hey, bear, don't need to yell at it. Let it know you're a person. If you got people in your group, gather together so you're in a group. Pull out your bear spray. Hopefully you're carrying bear spray, and let it know that you're people, you're a person, and just slowly back up away from it. You don't ever want to run unless you can, immediately get to a vehicle or into your house, something like that. But in terms of playing dead, not unless the bear's physically going to touch you. And, the other thing is, if you're in your tent camping and a bear comes in and tries to pull you out of your tent at night, that bear may be doing something more predatory. And so if it's a predatory type of thing, if you feel like the bear's trying to, kill you or eat you, you're going to want to fight back. Okay. If you come around the corner and it's a female grizzly, she's got cubs, she charges you, you don't get your bear spray out, you fall to the ground, she's going to touch you. That's when you would want to play dead. If she's got cubs, all she's trying to do is defend them. It's a quick encounter. People that have done that might get a bite or two, get rolled around, and usually those bears will end up leaving. One thing that I will stress, I've been working on bears since 1984 on grizzlies, and I've never had a bad experience or a bad encounter with grizzlies. And I carry bear spray all the time, whether I'm recreating or working. And I've never had to spray a bear with bear spray, but I know a lot of people that have, and they've been very successful in stopping, bears from charging or attacking. How many bears of both varieties are in Sanders County? Well, that's a good question. Definitely a lot more black bears in Sanders County than there are grizzly bears. Like I said, in the cabinet yak, they figure maybe 25 grizzly bears in the cabinet portion of it. If you include the yak, it's about 50, but that's, outside Sanders County. Not a lot of grizzly bears down in Sanders County, but there are, a lot of black bears definitely down that area. We just haven't done a good population estimate in most of Sanders County, so it's kind of hard to say that. Since you've been working with bears, what changes have you seen related to climate change? Well, that's a difficult thing to wrap, your arms around in terms of, are bears denning earlier? Are they denning later? What I've noticed is it seems like bears are going into the dens a little bit later. Whether that's related to climate change or not, I don't know. But I used to always figure that most grizzlies were in their dens by the middle of November. Then it kind of was more like Thanksgiving time. And now we've got bears that are out until the end of December at times. And so, whether that's due to climate change or not, I don't know. We're looking at denning physiology. We're looking at denning entrance dates and whatnot to see if there is any change there. In terms of vegetation, I haven't noticed anything different really that I could attribute to climate change in terms of huckleberries, but that is something that people are concerned about in terms of food sources and how bears might react to that. The good thing is they're pretty adaptable. And so I think bears are pretty good at, adapting to different food sources. It's just a matter of how that could impact bears. And I guess we'll find out as time goes on. Is there a difference between grizzly bear behavior in the Bob Marshall and those in Glacier Park? I get asked that question a fair amount because people think that grizzly bears in Glacier aren't wary of people because they've never, they haven't been hunted. And the bears in the Bob Marshall are more wary of people because over time, in the past they were hunted. But I think it's a matter of, again, the individual bears and what the situation is. I know people have encountered grizzlies in Glacier Park and the bears turned tail and ran. I know people have encountered grizzlies in the Bob Marshall and had bears charge them. So, and vice versa. So it kind of depends on the individual bears and what the individual situation is. If a person uses a firearm in self-defense during an attack, are there any repercussions for the individual if they weren't carrying bear spray? No. So you can legally defend yourself with a firearm in defense of your life or in defense of somebody else's life. You can't kill a grizzly bear because it's coming into your backyard and you just feel scared. But if it's in defense of your life or someone else's life, and you can justify that, there aren't any repercussions for killing a grizzly bear if you can demonstrate that it was for self-defense, whether you had bear spray or not. Why do they pull people out of tents? Are people not putting food away? Or some bears crazy just like people? Interesting question. It's very, very rare for bears to pull somebody out of a tent. It has happened, and those bears that have done that are basically, they can follow it back to where maybe that bear was getting food rewards in the campgrounds before, and they associate tents with places that people have left food. That's why there's food storage orders in place in the Forest Service and the Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park, is to try to prevent bears from coming in and getting food rewards in campgrounds and around camps. And so the bears that have done something like that are bears that are looking for food, and some of those bears have been predatory in the past. And again, that's why the food storage are put into place to avoid that. How many of the bears are called about are bears that you are tracking with radio collars? Oh, how many bears have we caught that are bears that you are tracking with radio collars? I guess that's what the question is. Out of the 1,000 grizzly bears in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, between management captures like I do or Mike Madel does out of Shodo or Jamie Junkel out of Missoula, bear specialist, or the population trend monitoring program, excuse me, we have about 70 grizzly bears radio collared in the NCDE out of 1,000. So very few out of the 1,000 grizzly bears are radio collared. Why are some bears put down instead of offering them to zoos or other places that might be interested in them? Well, this is kind of a difficult situation because most zoos don't want to take older bears because they don't adapt to captivity that well. Bears are very long-lived species in zoos. It's hard to place them. So if you get a bear that lives 30 years and the zoo can handle 2 or 3 bears, you know, they may be full for 30 years. And we also have to place bears in facilities that have certain accreditation, whether it's AZZ or AZA accreditation. Most zoos want cubs. Like we have 3 orphan cubs right now that were in Helena that came from the Rocky Mountain front. And they just decided finally to place them with a facility in Arizona. They tried multiple zoos. You know, I've placed grizzlies at the Grizzly Wolf Discovery Center in West Yellowstone. They actually have 4 grizzlies out of the 8 bears they have there that I've sent to them. 1 from Whitefish, 1 from Coram, and 2 last year from Condon area. And those were cubs last year. And they only have room for 8 bears. And, you know, they have bears in there that are over, you know, female, it's, I think, over 30 years old now. And so as a, you know, bear dies or something, they have more room for a bear, but it's just hard to place them. And so that's why, you know, if we don't have a place to put them and the bear is going to be removed from the population, then we end up, you know, having to kill it, unfortunately. But we do try to place them if we can. Is it true that grizzly bears are significantly more aggressive than black bears? I would say on the average, grizzlies have more of a reputation to be more aggressive than black bears. But given the chance, most grizzlies don't want to deal with people. If they can leave, they prefer to do that. You know, people have been killed by both black bears and grizzly bears. Black bears seem to be more predacious on people if they end up killing somebody than grizzly bears do. But again, by and large, you know, grizzly bears, I think, tend to be a little bit more aggressive than black bears. Most black bears, they'll run from you. Grizzly bears may stand their ground. If I see a grizzly in a very safe manner, can collect bear hair or other samples, do you want it? Yeah, if you're not pulling it off the back of the grizzly bear, walking down the trail. Sure, if you are out hiking and you find a rub tree and it's got grizzly bear hair on it and you can collect it and document where it was, and bring it to us. We can put it into we have an opportunistic sample of grizzly bear hair like that we'll send in for DNA. And especially if you're in the wilderness areas. If you guys are in any of the wilderness areas, backcountry areas, it's really hard for us to get samples off of grizzly bears in the wilderness. Cape Kendall had a tough time getting a lot of samples out of the wilderness. And we've done some trapping in the wilderness and haven't had a lot of success catching bears in there. And we're running remote cameras in some of the wilderness areas to just try to get photographs of females with young in some of these areas. So if you're back there, you find grizzly bear hair that, you know, and can collect it and bring it out to us off a rub tree or something like that, sure, bring it to us and we can take a look at it. And if there's enough of the sample there, we can send it in.
Great.
Okay.
It's 3:58 and I think we made it through the question list really well.
Okay.
Tim, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
This was a really successful first webinar, I think, for the Flathead-Kootenai chapter.
Well, good. Well, I think we learned a few things on the technical aspects of it. And I'm glad Dylan has 2 screens here. So I see you on one screen and the camera's on another screen. And so I'm looking back and forth, but I'm trying to concentrate on the camera. I thought it went well, and I hope people learned a few things. And people have any questions, they're always free to, you know, contact me through Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and I'd be more than happy to visit with people.
Great.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tim. And thanks everybody for joining us in a webinar today.
We had at one point 40 attendees, which I would count as a packed room.
Oh, good, good. Well, thanks, Amy and Allie, for setting it all up. I enjoyed doing it anytime.
Thank you so much.
And everyone.
Yep. Goodbye.
Bye.
Now I don't know how to shut all this down.
I'm
I got to go find Dylan. Yeah. We've been on 4 different computers today.